Happy New Year to everybody, and what an amazing day of New Year's games on the college football slate. Michigan versus Alabama in the Rose Bowl, Washington versus Texas in the Sugar Bowl, and we saw two phenomenal games between these four teams. Let's start in the Alabama-Michigan game. The number one overall seed in the college football playoffs, the Michigan Wolverines, squeaked out a crazy victory in overtime against Alabama. Offensively, they really struggled throughout the entire game. The Alabama defense did a great job of shutting down this run. McCarthy throughout the game picked up some very big third downs, getting outside of the pocket and pushing the ball down the field. Michigan in this game faced a lot of adversity early on with the McCarthy interception that was called back, to having to overcome two different multiple 7-point leads. And I think late in that fourth quarter, a lot of people thought it wasn't going to be third time the charm for Michigan. It looked like Alabama was going to take them down. Milroe had a strong performance in the running game, had that fumble late in the fourth quarter, but ultimately didn't hurt the Crimson Tide. Michigan pulled out a very gritty victory, showing that they can run the ball effectively against an elite defense in Alabama, and that's going to be huge for the national championship. Now in our other game, we saw 2 versus 3, Washington versus Texas, two explosive offenses. Michael Penix Jr., the Heisman runner-up, with his elite trio of wide receivers in Jalen McMillan, Rome Odunze, Jalen Poole, Quinn Ewers with his explosive receiving core, Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, and everyone was expecting this to be a shootout, but I think Washington, even though this was only a 6-point game at the end of it, Washington ultimately dominated this game. There were many different times in this game that they could have pulled away. You look in the first half, Washington muffed that punt that gave Texas an automatic red zone opportunity. If they don't fumble that punt, they potentially have a chance to take a 14-point lead. But I can't say enough good things about this Washington team. What Michael Penix Jr. did through the air, leading this Washington team. He went 29 of 38, 430 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. Also was very effective with his legs. He looked unshakable when really the run game wasn't doing much. They tried pressuring him, and Penix was cool as a cucumber. He was dicing up this Texas defense all day long, and this Longhorns defensive line that was one of the best in the country was really ineffective pressuring Penix. He's put the nation on notice, and it's going to be very interesting to see come April, when the draft rolls around, where Penix will go. He is 24 years old, which is on the older side of quarterbacks entering the draft, but he has one of the best deep balls in the class, if not the best deep ball. He's accurate as all, has amazing arm strength, is mobile, has a great demeanor, has the measurables, 6'3", 213 pounds, and Michael Penix Jr. really checks the boxes in a lot of these places, and we may see his draft stock rapidly on the rise. Washington this entire season, even though they're 14-0, won the Pac-12 championship, just won the Sugar Bowl. They've been one of the most disrespected elite teams that I've seen in the college football playoff era. You go back to the Pac-12 championship, they were almost a touchdown underdog against Oregon. They pulled out a huge victory to ultimately send them to the college football playoffs. We saw it again here in the Sugar Bowl. 4.5-point underdogs against Texas. They absolutely routed them. Michael Penix Jr. got whatever he wanted, and this offense dominated. And now as we head here to the national championship, Washington will face off against Michigan. Michigan is an early 4.5-point favorite, and it's the same story Washington has seen all year long. Before I actually dive into the national championship and break that down for you guys, I need to comment on how well of a job the college football playoff committee did in selecting these four teams. There was a lot of controversy on Selection Sunday when Florida State ultimately got snubbed. A lot of people were upset that Georgia didn't make the playoffs after they were the 2-time reigning defending national champions. But on New Year's Day, when you watched those two college football playoffs, you could tell that those were the 4 best teams in the country. These were amazing games. We saw the Alabama-Michigan game go into overtime. Michigan overcame that adversity. J.J. McCarthy led the Wolverines on a late touchdown drive, tying up this ball game, ultimately sending it to overtime. Then Corum did his job, got them in the end zone, gave them a 7-point lead, and Alabama was unable to answer. And in that Washington-Texas game, even though it seemed like Washington had control most of the game, Texas made a very late run that made things very interesting. The committee did an awesome job. What a Monday of college football. But now we get to look forward to the national championship in Houston. A very different feeling as a fan and analyst from last year, as Georgia was a 13.5-point favorite against TCU, where they ultimately blew blew them out and it was a terrible game. Now we're seeing Michigan only favored by 4.5, and something tells me that this is going to be an electric game. I'm super pumped up. On the one side, you have Michigan, who showed that they can dominate anybody through the run game, and if they need to tap into their passing attack, they absolutely can. J.J. McCarthy is more than capable. Roman Wilson put together a huge drive of catches, leading the Wolverines down the field, getting them into the end zone. This Michigan defense is one of the grittiest and toughest in the country. We saw it repeatedly throughout the Rose Bowl, getting after Jalen Milroe. They sacked him 5 times. And then you have Washington, like I mentioned, one of the most disrespected teams in the country up to this point. Michael Penix Jr. leading the best offense in the nation. This elite receiving core absolutely balling out. I'm hoping that Dylan Johnson is healthy enough to go in the national championship. We saw him with that late injury in the Texas game. He's been phenomenal, one of the best running backs in the country, especially in the second half of the season. This Washington offensive line's been great. And as a collective unit, the Huskies have the best offense in the country. On the defensive side of the ball, they're also really underrated in my opinion. Jabbar Muhammad has been an elite cornerback for the Huskies on the outside. He's done a great job of shutting down receivers number 1, and he did an excellent job in that Texas game. On last week's show, I told you guys that Alabama would ultimately squeak out this win. I thought they were the better team, and ultimately mistakes shot themselves in the foot, resulting in them losing this game. I did also pick Washington, who is the underdog, and I feel like they've just been an absolute wagon all year long. I can't fade the hot hand, so I'm going back to my well with the Washington Huskies. They've been elite all season long. Like I said, they have the best offense in the country. Michael Penix Jr. has done it against some of the best. He's done it against Oregon twice. Oregon State on the road. We just saw him do it against Texas. Michael Penix Jr. rises to the occasion. You could make the argument this year that the Pac-12 was the toughest conference in football this season, and Michael Penix Jr. absolutely dominated it. I think Washington will win the national championship against Michigan. I think we might see them start slow against this tough Michigan defense. The Wolverines are going to have their way running the ball with Corum, but in the second half, we're going to see a late comeback from Washington and Michael Penix Jr., and the Washington Huskies will win the 2024 national championship. I'm Caden Kubler, and that's my take.